One guest today. That'll be our only guest. That is State Senator Rob Sampson from Wolcott, who is a wonderful guy, an honest politician, and a liberty-based politician. That is, he believes in the American system of government. One of the few people in the country today and in the state of Connecticut in political life who actually stands up for those causes, thus making him my favorite elected official. Hello there, Rob.
Good afternoon, Todd. Thank you so much for that very kind and generous introduction. I will do my best to continue to live up to it.
Well, you have no problem doing that. So I wanted to get you on because I heard the news yesterday about Jolly Ned extending the lack of optimism. He's extending the lack of optimism, and the lack of optimism appears to be contagious. I don't know if you've noticed that. So he's got new rules to keep things closed down right when everybody's talking about opening things up, and he's got this new Landlord Punishment Act that he's extending. Tell us about that and how you respond to that as somebody who I believe owns apartments.
Right. So we could start definitely by talking about that. That's going to be my course of action over the next day or two, is putting together a release stating my opinions about the latest quote-unquote rental assistance program that the governor described it as. And when challenged on how it actually assists not only tenants but landlords, he said, oh, well, we took care of them before, but with no specifics. Because the truth is, this is a one-sided, very political arrangement where the governor is going to put forward an executive order that says essentially to tenants, don't worry about paying your rent on time. The landlords will just have to eat it. And nothing could be more political, Todd, than a elected official, especially a governor who happens to be serving at a time where he has complete and utter authority to alter statutes, to choose one population to benefit at the expense of another. That is the very definition of how politics is dangerous to us, and why it's very, very dangerous to have one person making the laws and not, an actual legislative body deliberating.
Well, we've learned that even having a legislative body is dangerous, but one guy is really going over the top. So the state already is bankrupt because of having one party rule and having the legislature having the Democratic Party determined to only make laws that give preferential treatment and benefits to its key voting blocks. And right. This is a continuation of that. Let all the poor people who Democrats fight to hyper-represent, to over-represent, let them have everything. How will this work from what you understand?
Yeah, well, we're beginning to see the seeds of how one party or one person rule can be abused. That's what we're seeing right now. It's funny, Todd, is earlier this past week, I think Monday or Tuesday, I had sent a letter to the governor basically telling him, say, hey, look, I know we're going to go through probably the worst week of this terrible crisis, but we got to start thinking about how we're going to affect our economic recovery. And I gave him a list of things to do. The number one thing I did was call attention to the fact that every state employee is still being paid full wages and benefits, whether they're working or not. And we are still funding their pensions, even though the private sector has been basically put out of business in a large way. And I also asked him for some common sense things, like do not, waive the fees for professional licenses and that kind of thing, so that when we get out of this, that's not the obstacle for people going back to work. And then one other thing I asked for was don't raise the unemployment insurance rates for businesses that were forced to be closed or otherwise affected. And then, so on Thursday or Friday, he actually announces that he's going to adopt that change in his executive order to not surcharge the unemployment insurance rates. And I was delighted. I was excited. Mm-hmm. I started writing a press release thanking the governor. And in the very same breath, someone leans over and tells me, by the way, he's also going to extend the closings till May 20th. And my mouth just dropped open. I'm like, this is 6 weeks away. Why are you making such a drastic decision? And it's the same. It's the exact opposite of what he originally did, but very much the same. Because what he did the first time was he closed businesses essentially overnight, arbitrarily, forgetting what is truly essential and non-essential, and forgetting that it's not really the government's responsibility to decide that. And this time, he's making an even broader, more aggressive stance, but again, with no forethought and with no answers to how that affects people.
We're talking to State Senator Rob Sampson. So, Rob, what's the other thing that you're upset about right now? Is this it, the extension till May 20th?
Right, because I think it's too broad, too drastic, and unnecessary. No one knows what's going to happen with this virus in the next 2 weeks, let alone 6 weeks from now. And there was no reason to determine that businesses must remain shuttered for all that period. You could easily say we're going to extend it for 2 weeks and then decide whether or not we're going to extend it again and so forth.
Yes, but if you're one of them, that is the people who hold elective office who view it as a job designed to allow you to do whatever you feel like doing in order to make sure you keep your job. Isn't it a better tactic for a politician to have the shutdown extended to May 20th, and then if he decides that on May 10th he wants to lift it, he gets to be the guy who's relieving the punishment. He's effectively the guy curing the disease by his own decree. He looks really good and gets a good news cycle out of it, doesn't he?
Potentially, yes. But that's not the way we should be governing. That is for certain. And Todd, just as a side note, I would say that is the most disconcerting thing about this whole, COVID, scare pandemic. It's a real thing, obviously, and we all have to pay attention to it. And I'm social distancing myself, and I'm encouraging others to. I keep making the case to people who want to see more and more government action that the government doesn't need to act for people to. People can make their own determinations. I think it's the responsibility of the government to pass on the important information to citizens so they can assess their own risk. Decide. So
you don't buy any of the isolation argument that the social distancing is critical. If we hadn't gotten everybody indoors and cutting the circulation out, that people wouldn't really have understood it, because there is a learning curve that's just different for different people. You see some people who are wearing masks and have gloves on, and other people who are hanging around like nothing's changed, and everyone learns on a different curve. What's wrong in a acute emergency like this from the government stepping in and telling people what to do?
Well, I think it's fundamentally un-American, for one thing. I think that this is a country of free citizens, and that they should have the right to make their own determination and assess their own risk. And if the government is going to be involved, which there's a worthwhile debate there, if the government is going to be involved, though, it should be making policy that is well thought out and fair. I mean, again, how do you justify what is essential versus non-essential via some completely arbitrary definitions?
Well, not arbitrary. You do it for your own. You do it for your own political best interest. That's how they do it.
And that is how they do it, and that is the problem.
Yes. Well, that's what I see as the downside. I think most people listening to you will ask you the question I just asked: what's wrong? We need the government to step in, and the answer is, when the government gets close to any power it shouldn't have, that becomes not just a temporary power, but a permanent one, and another step on the slippery slope.
Well, that's true. And it's also completely ineffective. I mean, Todd, there is not a cop car in my driveway preventing me from going outside. And yet I am social distancing, and so are a lot of other people. Everything that we do is being done voluntarily. Even the businesses that are closed, they're closing voluntarily. I mean, if they all wanted to stay open, what exactly is the government going to do about that? They can't. Well,
but you could argue that in that mix is the government issuing orders, and that people view that as being a powerful instruction of what right and wrong are, and that helps get everybody on board for the voluntary action that you're describing.
Possibly, except that they do it so inefficiently that I wonder if it's effective or not. The other day, they imposed a restriction on certain businesses to say that they could only have a certain number of people in the building at one time. And I remember right as that happened, I had constituents sending me photos by text showing me that outside of the Walmart, there was a line of people, not social distancing, of course, waiting to get in. Doesn't this defeat the purpose of limiting the people inside? And of course, it's a natural, byproduct of the policy that was not well thought out to begin with. That's what bugs me about all of this is that, hey, Rob, stop second guessing our leaders. You're not a doctor. Well, I'm like, Ned Lamont is not a doctor either. And the policies that he is putting in place, he is doing in a completely arbitrary way. There is nothing scientific about any of it. And
well, it's not arbitrary. He waits till Andrew Cuomo does something, and then he follows suit. Come on. I'm just teasing you, Rob.
Yeah,
Relax.
I mean,
so,
I can't.
Any
other that logic?
Any other thought? I want to get you out of here so I can take calls. But anything else you want to tell us?
By all means, I would just encourage people to remember our American system of government, which is that our leaders are not supposed to be leading us. That's not their job. They are supposed to be responding to the will and wishes of their constituents, and above all, protecting the right of every individual.
All right. Rob Sampson, State Senator from Wolcott. Thank you, sir. Where's your social media stuff? Give people how to reach you, instructions.
You can find me on SenatorSampson.com or just look me up on Facebook. I'm pretty easy to find.
That's the whole word, Senator?
Yep.
SenatorSampson.com. Thank you, sir. Good to talk with you.
Always a pleasure, Todd. Thank you for the opportunity.
Enjoy your weekend as best you can as you stay in isolation. Mike, we need to take a break.